Welcome to Singing Your Own Song, where purpose and passion meet under life's spotlight. In each captivating episode, we'll highlight the unique career journey of a special guest, where boundaries are pushed, dreams are realized, and purpose takes center stage. Get ready to be inspired, enlightened, and motivated as we uncover stories of those who have not only found their calling, but are living it every day. And now, your host, Carlton Burrows.
Well, hello to the viewing and listening audience. I am really excited today because I actually have had an opportunity to reconnect with someone that I have known for, oh my goodness, it has to be over 15 years now. And they say that, when things are meant to be, they're meant to be. So, and we'll talk about the relationship. I want to bring to the podcast Miss Na'ilah Amaru. She is a political strategist and campaign advisor who I remember from her early days in her career when she was working in the workforce and economic development space. And we'll talk a little bit about how we know each other there. And I've just seen this young lady, oh my goodness, almost like a meteor. She's kind of skyrocketed from, kind of working in the grassroots, working in the front lines to now. I mean, I think one of the things that I remember, and I'll let her talk about it, but she actually was a speaker at the, if I'm not mistaken, the 2016 Democratic National Convention and did an amazing job. I looked and I saw it and I was like, oh my goodness, I know her. So it's been a real fun ride. And I really, rather than take her shine, I'd rather let her talk a little bit about her journey, how she got there. And I will say this, though, before handing it off, I'm really amazed when I see a modern day Renaissance women or Renaissance men. And this young lady, I would say, is a political activist. She's an educator. She's always been, I would say, a lifelong learner. And what you may not be able to tell just ostensibly is that she is a soldier. And that is, to me, one of the most amazing things, because I have a family history of people who've come through the military. Both my father and my brother, went through the military as well as other family members. So that's a real, I would say, high point for me, a soft spot for me as well. So without further ado, let me bring to the podcast Miss Na'ilah Amaru. Na'ilah, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Carlton, it is so great to reconnect with you. It's been a while, but not that long since, we are both in our prime time in this journey called life. But it's always been so wonderful to share space with you. And hello to the listeners out there. So I think for me, I think it's important to share my origin story, if you will, except not for why I'm a villain, but why I do the work that we do.
Okay.
Because our work, depending on which stage we are in life, is a reflection of our values, what we're trying to achieve, in this journey. Sometimes it's a paycheck, right? Been there, done that. But at the end, I think when we have our career that we're building, it's really important to be very clear in the North Star that guides us in our decisions. So for me, I joined the Army right after high school, 3 days actually after high school, as an ammunition specialist in Uncle Sam's Army. I have absolutely no regrets. I learned a lot about life, leadership, discipline, structure, learned a lot about what it means to live with honor and integrity. And also the other side of that is the military is a very hierarchical institution. And I learned very quickly the consequences of not having any power. I was a woman, enlisted. And so through those experiences, I really wanted to come back into civilian service after I fulfilled my tour of duty in Iraq. Very clear on what my new mission was, transitioning back into civilian life, which was to essentially create and expand spaces for people power, right? And that has changed and evolved depending on the hat that I'm wearing, the roles I've occupied, the level of government that I've been advocating for or against, again, depending on my chapter in life. And throughout my journey and currently, there are 3 primary buckets in which I build grassroots governing power. One is through issue campaigns, which is basically representing community-based organizations in the budget and legislative processes and mobilizing their members, local neighborhoods to engage in actions so that they have recognized the agency and the power that they have to influence government decisions. The other bucket I work in is elections. Again, being, a consultant and also tried and true campaign staffer to many different electoral elections at every level of government. Getting started off actually in Georgia, some of my earlier campaigns. And the other dimension to the election bucket is one of my joys is training women to run for public office, with a focus on women of color, but women generally just really wanting to change the face of political leadership at every level of government. And the last bucket I work on is essentially policy advocacy, and that really taps into more the government relations, indirect direct lobbying, connecting everyday people to their elected representatives and having them share their stories on the impact, negative or positive, of issues that are being introduced, in terms of how that will impact them and their communities as well as their families. And so essentially over the last 20 something years, you can edit that out. That's the verbal blur of, we're not going to talk about how long I've been in the game, but long enough to know that everyone has a role to play and making sure that our government represents the interest of everyday people. And I've gone back and forth between consulting roles, being a campaign staffer, being a public interest lobbyist, having worked directly in nonprofits myself, having been a Capitol Hill staffer, City Hall staffer. All the roles have given me a really unique understanding of what power looks like and how it shifts. And the tools that are needed to shift it, which always begins in the power of everyday people, holding their representatives accountable and remaining engaged before and after Election Day. So that's the Cliff's Notes version of my story. And for the Gen Zs and young millennials, Cliff Notes is basically an old school way of giving you the top line highlights of books if you didn't want to read the whole book. So that's the top line, I think, career highlights for me, and really looking forward to this conversation. Thank you so much, Carlton.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And, and I think I love your journey, right? Because we've talked a little bit about it, and I love the way that you've kind of navigated through, and maybe talk a little bit about those decision points, because I think we all have them, right? We all have, when we come out of, like you said, you came out of school, you went straight into the military, and then you from there started working in a lot of programs that if you look at the theme, they all have really a purpose, right? They have an impact, and they're empowering, in particular, women, but then I think women of color. So what would you say were some of those turning points along the way, and maybe just pick a couple that helped you choose that path?
Absolutely. I love that question. One of my earlier roles was starting off as a direct service nonprofit worker. And my primary role was basically as a group facilitator. I worked with a different cohort every 10 weeks, making sure they were learning what they needed to learn, preparing them with the resources that they needed to live full, productive, healthy lives. And I enjoyed the work. But I also began to think about, well, what happens to the people who go through my cohort a year from now, or 3 years from now, or 5 years from now?
Yeah.
And so I was in that particular role was very much focused on the one-on-one. It was the direct service. It was the here and now. How can we stop the trauma that you're going through and provide you with the resources that you need to make it to tomorrow. And so there was not in that particular role a focus on the next month or the next year or the next 5 years. And so I began to think about this concept of impact and what it means to me, depending on my role. And that type of impact matters. To be very clear, as an organizer, as social workers, you have this amazing ability to touch people in such a personal way through those one-on-one support systems, through those one-on-one conversations. But that's only one type of impact, right? And one type of impact is not any more or any less important than the other. It's just different. And we need all the different dimensions of impact. Another role that that was a helpful decision point for me in transitioning more into government to focus on the policy scale was as an organizer. I was a grassroots tenant organizer, and I loved knocking on doors and talking to people about the issues. At that time, I was always organizing against the government, because it was to mobilize the folks, to let them be aware of, here's what the government is coming down in terms of development to change the neighborhood, so on and so forth. And I learned two important lessons. One, that there are communities, often our communities that, the communities that I still work with and represent, and work in partnership with, government is this abstract other. It's this thing that happens to people, as opposed to it is an institution that belongs to the people. And that essentially, I think, encapsulates my life's work of trying to change people's understanding that government is not something that happens bad to them. It is something that belongs to them. And here are points of entry, points that you can engage, points that you can show up as an active citizen, to become involved in this process of government decision-making, whether that's about budgets, whether that's about, the laws. Regardless of government, there are opportunities for everyday people to be incredibly influential advocates, and, fundamentally shape the laws and budget decisions that impact their lives. And I realized that I can organize rallies and marches and protests, but as an organizer, if I don't have access to the decision makers, then my impact in that particular type of role is limited. Not less important, right? Still incredibly important, still incredibly influential. But in terms of impact, and also adding this dimension of thinking about scale, it's just different. And so those are two experiences that really have resonated with me. And I go back to those lessons and that feeling, right, of the work I'm doing is important in this particular framework. How can I scale it? And if you have to scale, then you have to go address the policy side, right? So if you're moving from the one-on-one to the more larger scale of policies that impact those individual lives. And again, I think for me, when we're talking about decision points, it's always going back to fundamental questions of what is my job here? And then what I always frame every job I've ever had is, what is my life's work, right? So there's our job,
Wow.
And then there's our work, right? When we're lucky, and I've been lucky, our jobs will align with our life's work and lead us further and more deeply into that purpose. And like I said at the beginning, sometimes we have the job that pays the bills, and we have to do what we have to do depending on our circumstances.
Yes.
But that's kind of how I've navigated my journey, is always revisiting that question of, what is the role that I'm serving in this particular position now, and how does that lead to my greater work of life? And what does impact mean to me? Does that align with what impact means for me in this role? Is the level of scale right for me? Because sometimes scale to me, I miss my grassroots organizing. I miss the knocking on doors, right? But that may not be the season in life that I'm supposed to be in. And I've learned to be attuned with what I'm feeling when it's ready to move forward in that next step. Is another important lesson I've learned in terms of, I think, just those decision points of, every season is not forever. Learn what you need to learn, do the good that you can, where you can and how you can, and be attuned to listen to that next assignment for you.
Wow. So I heard a couple of themes. I mean, I heard a lot, right? But a couple of themes that I would love to unpack. One is, I think you talked about passion and your purpose, right? Walking in your purpose versus your job. So that's very interesting, because I think you're right. A lot of people, they get into work that they enjoy. It may not necessarily be aligned with what is truly their purpose. So they have to end up kind of splitting themselves, where you do and live the things that you're passionate about outside of work. So how long was it, or how early was it rather, that you knew that this was the kind of work that you wanted to do? You wanted to be out in the streets, making major change, empowering people, and kind of navigating through this political landscape. When did you know that?
I think so. I don't think I ever just knew. I think it was just a series of experiences where, oh, I just worked a 14-hour day, but I'm not exhausted. I feel energized. I feel like I am excited about going back and doing this all over again tomorrow and the next day and the next day and the next day. But I also think it's really important to establish boundaries, right? Like there's our job, there's our work, and then there's our life, right? Like one of the important things I've learned is how critical building strong support networks are, right? To navigate all the things that life and work can bring us. So I think it's also important to recognize that, yes, for some folks, there's a disconnect between what they do their 9 to 5, and then they find their joy and they dig into their purpose after work. And that's certainly fine, to each their own. I also think when we're talking about this, this concept of purpose, for me, if you ask me what my purpose is, my overall mission, I would tell you it's to build grassroots governing power, right? At the end of the day, that is why I feel I am on this earth. That is what I choose to invest my time, talent, and treasure into doing. However, Carlton, how I've done that has changed depending on the time and season I'm in, right? I was building grassroots governing power as a community organizer. I was building grassroots governing power as a, campaign manager, trying to run good candidates to get them elected so that they would be more conducive to introducing and supporting bills that would be helpful to everyday people. I was building grassroots governing power, working as a government staffer, again, representing the interest of the people on a more local level, but still, including constituents in all the ways that I could in that particular role into, where and how, the district needed its needs to be met. So there are different ways to achieve what the overall purpose is. And also the other thing that I've come to learn in recent years is that for me, while it's always been very clear what my personal mission is, and how I've done it has changed, I think that our purpose is not necessarily like this abstract, mythical thing that we are always in search of, and that when it discovers us, then we find out our purpose for living. Being an intentional woman, I think that our purpose can be whatever it is that we choose to be, right? I think that it can also be, how do you want to build your legacy in whatever space that you're in, whether that's in work or whether that's in your personal life. And so I've been thinking about this, over the last, I think more recent years of my career. When we're talking about purpose, I'm now beginning to transition into legacy. Again, for me, purpose has been clear for me, but also I think that you can wake up and decide what you want it to be. And there's so much power in that, of when you really own your agency and step into making a decision, and commit to it. Because your gifts and your talents are needed, but how powerful is it that you have the agency to choose how you want to share your gifts with the world.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, and it's I think it really resonates because, as you know, my career has been in the human resources, human capital, leadership space. So I think when we met, I was with a little small computer company, Hewlett Packard, and working in HR space, working on some merger stuff with the HP Compact merger. And I saw that there. I saw a lot of people whose lives were really shifted around through no fault of their own, and they had to really go back and dig deep and say, wow, now how do I reinvent myself to continue to fill out or live out what I consider to be my purpose or to walk this path? So you made a really great point. The fact that you go through stages, right? And in each and every stage, you are playing a role. And that role in some way will bleed into that overall purpose, but the role may change, the purpose doesn't, right?
Absolutely.
And that, I think that's an amazing point that you made that we can maybe bring to the audience, because sometimes it feels like the sky is falling when something
Yes.
changes in your life, right? Especially something as large as a career, or other major things with family or whatever. But a lot of times that's just a transition point for you to really reevaluate, reground, and then really take steps to move to that next chapter, right? Because nothing is forever, right? So making sure you're prepared for that next chapter is critical. So thanks for sharing that.
Absolutely. And I'll just jump in and say,
Yeah.
what you just shared, I have a personal testimony,
Yes.
especially in America, and I imagine the world over, but particularly in America, so much of our identity is our jobs, right? It defines, how we introduce ourselves oftentimes, who we are, how we're perceived, what bucket people put us in at networking events. There's so much weight and so much value that is put into the title that is in our business cards. I worked on Capitol Hill for a while, and the short story is I hated Capitol Hill, loved who I worked for, loved the people, but like the job, I had no connection to grassroots folks, and so it was not a good fit for me. And so in 2012, I made the insane decision that has remained the best decision I've ever made. Is I packed my bags and I moved to New York with no job and no network. But God is good. And I share that because in 2012, it was the first time in my life where I had to go into rooms and to spaces and to meet people where I was no longer introducing myself as, here I am, Na'ilah Amaru, boom, business card title, right? I had to figure out in real time, who am I when I'm not working on a campaign? Who am I when I'm not representing an elected official? Who am I when I am not protected by a title on a business card? And I went through this really interesting experience for, like, I would say maybe the first 6 months to a year of trying to figure out who that was. And interestingly enough, Carlton, I found myself when I moved to New York, I didn't have a plan, which is ironic because I'm a planner. I'm a type A, planner. But I was just like, let me just figure this out, because DC ain't it for me, at least at this point. Wasn't ready to go back to Atlanta. But I found myself in the same spaces I was before, in the community town halls, at local government meetings, learning about legislation, learning about budget decisions, not as a lobbyist, not as a staffer, not as anyone who's working on any of the issues relevant, because I was genuinely interested. But I will share to that last point that you made, Carlton, was that I went through that, right? I've gone through that a couple of times, when, especially folks who work on campaigns, those are quick 3 to 6 months positions, and then you're off to the next chapter. I've learned that when you don't have a title to hide behind, you're really forced to ask yourself how you want to show up. And again, there's power in defining that for yourself, right? There are times when this is a room where I'm really leaning into my grassroots organizing chops, right? I started off with you, knocking on doors, organizing rallies. Other times it's more into, maybe like, the nonprofit side or the government staffer side. But I did want to elevate that, is that oftentimes we hide behind titles that are arbitrary and do not reflect the value that we bring into rooms or conversations or into the lives of people that we cross paths with, and that there's power in us understanding that reality.
Wow, I love it. This is the point where if I did wear neckties, I'd kind of loosen it and lay back and would get into the relaxed part of the conversation. So you mentioned something else, and I hear the theme. I mean, I love what you just said, and I think I hear also empowerment, right? You've talked about empowerment before. You talked about empowering yourself just now in terms of learning who you are and where you are, and being able to release, I would say, the training wheels, so to speak, of the titles and of the companies, and just say, hey, this is me. I'm out here, pure, open to, my constituents or my audience or whatever. I would say maybe talk about a time when it was obvious to you that there was a major challenge, and for whatever reason you didn't feel empowered to make the change that you needed. And how did you deal with that? How did you either find a different way to approach it, or reframe your perception of it? And I don't want to give you answers. I just want to ask you to, maybe talk through, especially in this arena, because government politics is known to be cutthroat. So I have to say, for you, someone I've always known to be just a kind, open, gentle, free-spirited person, I can see that being potentially one of those internal conflicts. So how have you navigated through those changes where you really had to twist some things around to make it happen?
I love that question. So not to be self-promoting, but I did write an article about this, and I'll share the highlights that I hear. But there's a blog called Brown Girls Guide to Politics, and I wrote a blog titled "When to Fight and When to Walk Away."
Wow.
And it was basically a short story, if you will, of, as women, particularly as women of color, but regardless of our identities, we all go through these experiences of, as we go through the work journey, specifically to the work, regardless if you're corporate, nonprofit, government, what have you, we come across obstacles, these brick walls, and we have a decision to make. Do we choose to stay, or do we choose to walk away? And what are the questions, what are the criteria that we must evaluate in order to decide which option is best for us? Not the organization, not your boss, not your worker, not your coworkers. What is best for you to maintain your peace, right? And just very quickly, and there's so many different ways that, these walls manifest. Sometimes it's organizational structure, sometimes it's your boss, sometimes it's your coworkers, sometimes it's things that, just depending on the circumstances. One of the things that I shared in terms of, do I choose to stay? If I choose to stay in an organization when I am constantly dealing with a roadblock, the question is, do I see myself wanting to move up within this organization, right? Because we've all been in spaces, or I shouldn't say all, I know I have been in spaces where I'm like, oh, this is what it is. Okay, I want to fight and make it better because I see this organization doing better, and for it to do better, it needs my talent, my skills, and my expertise to get it to that next level. I'm going to choose to fight in this organization because I see myself moving up, and in the process of doing so, sharing what I know to strengthen the organization to reach its mission, right? That's the question, is, do you see yourself hanging around in this organization? Do you want to? Because I've been in organizations where I'm like, oh, this is the leadership team. Oh,
I hear you.
So for the folks who can't see us, there's an exchange of direct eye contact.
You say more without words than you do with words, right?
Absolutely.
I hear you.
And if you see yourself wanting to be a member of the leadership team versus like if you don't, that's a very telltale sign of this is going to be a pit stop, for you to do what you got to do while you're looking for something that's more aligned and will engage you more, versus like if you do see yourself wanting to really fight to make this organization better in spite of those walls. The other option is to walk away. Yeah. And I have done that. And there's always mixed emotions. Oftentimes it's, you come into a workplace for me, sometimes there's a difference in vision. Maybe I'm in a space where they only care about, national partnerships. We only have to, align ourselves with folks who are high profile. Whereas for me as an organizer, I'm thinking, well, I want to invest in the organizations that already have the trust and engagement of the people, right? So that's a red flag of like, no matter how much you want to focus on national partnerships and, increase your visibility, that's not aligned with what I know to be important as an organizer. So there's not a long runway for me to make it work here, right? And so this is my time to start planning my exit strategy. Sometimes it's not so much vision. Sometimes it can be, like the everyday, I've learned a hard lesson is sometimes your managers don't support you, right? Sometimes you have to work with people who are about themselves, and it is what it is. It's like where human nature comes into play, where human nature is everywhere. But at the end of the day, the question is, again, is this an organization or a place where you see yourself wanting to continue to show up and fight every day to make it better? Or is this a place where you choose to protect your peace, plan your exit strategy, and move on? And again, those two options can and the criteria that goes into those options show up in so many different ways. Again, from like differences in vision, conflict with your manager or coworkers. Another lesson I've learned is, again, recently, is establishing boundaries. I would work 60, 70-hour work weeks because I love the job, but I'm not being respected or valued for what I'm delivering. Or if what I'm delivering is not, being recognized, so like there are levels to this, right? I think especially is for people of color, but it happens everywhere. We do the work, especially in social justice spaces, because we love the work and we believe the work that we're doing. But sometimes that can lead to a very, very unhealthy, toxic expectation of, oh, what do you mean you're taking an hour lunch today? You've never taken hour lunches before. What do you mean you're not working on the weekend? Oh, because I'm working on my PhD now. That's why I have to establish boundaries. So I can't give you the 70-hour work weeks I was giving before and not getting paid for the overtime, right? But not making that an issue because I love the work, right? So I feel like I'm saying a lot, but basically that's what I've learned when you face those brick walls, which you will multiple times in your career over and over and over again. Fundamentally, you have two options. Do you want to stick around and make it work because you believe in what this organization is doing, so much so that you are willing to go into that fight and exhaust yourself time and time again? Or do you want to protect your peace and move on? And it's such a personal decision.
I love it. I mean, and one of the things that you said, I mean, you said a lot of profound things there, right? But I want to pull out a couple. One is really, it's about commitment, right? It's about, am I engaged, committed, and really, do I believe in the organization and the vision, where I am? And do I feel it's worth, let's be real, is it worth trading off some of my peace and my time and my energy?
Absolutely.
And fighting through this, whether it be for those behind me, whether it be to advocate for and rebuild this platform so that, the people we serve can be served better. I mean, there's a number of different ways that can play itself out, right? Now, I've been there, I've been there in my careers where I've had to make those hard choices to say, okay, I have a whole different vision than people who may be above me or maybe around me. So how do I proceed? And that's tough, man. Those are those difficult decisions where you really have to, I say, pray, meditate, commune with yourself, with your God, with, those who you really trust and lean on. So no, thanks for sharing that. Thanks for being vulnerable. I appreciate it. Now, so a couple other quick questions, and I know, we kind of prep for this, but there's some things I like to just leave, for the show because I love the real time vibe, right? So I see that you throughout your career have been the empowerer, the enabler, the person who is, hey, I'm going to run a campaign for this person. I want to help them get elected, etc. Do we have any possibility of Na'ilah Amaru at some point being the elected official, being the person who will be elected versus the person who's doing the electing?
I will say I have no intentions and absolutely no interest in running for office. But in full transparency, Carlton, 5 years ago, you could have convinced me that I was going to be pursuing my PhD, right?
Yeah.
So something life has taught me is that you never know. It is not a trajectory that interests me at this time or has ever interested me. I don't see, being of interest to me. I love supporting good women, good candidates, who share my values and want to do good things in elected office. I don't see that as being my role. Just a quick plug, when it comes to advocacy and policy, there are a lot of really critical ways that you can shape government decisions outside of being an elected official. We need more Black and brown women, Black and brown folks, women of color, being campaign managers, being the consultants, being in the war rooms to be like, how did this get out of committee? Because that is a bad idea, right? So for me, I do not see it. But again, as I've shared, maybe 10 years from now, I'll wake up and I'll call you Carlton. I'll be like, Carlton, I've decided to run for office. You never know. I don't see it. I really don't see it. I love the roles that I hold in supporting other women who really, really, really do want to represent and fight for their communities as elected officials.
Yeah. So never say never, but not on the roadmap just yet, right?
Not on the roadmap, period, but also.
I love it. Not trying to twist your arm, but you know what? If there ever was a ticket, Amaru for president, holla at your boy, because Secretary of Labor, Secretary of State. What? Hey, look.
Listen, when I'm on the come up, all my peoples are on the come up. Say less.
So I'm going to ask you a question that I'm sure you get asked, but I don't know if you do in this forum, but I can because you're my girl. I love the way your name flows, Na'ilah Amaru. It's one of those names that's melodic. It flows off the tongue. What, if you don't mind me asking, what's the origin of your name and your background? Because I know you've talked a lot about, DEI initiatives, women of color, brown and Black women. Talk about your background.
I love that. So I am Black and Indigenous. And my first name is Na'ilah, which means a few different things in different languages, but primarily the common thread is woman destined to succeed. And Amaru is Quechua. I'm part Incan Indian, Indigenous. And so very, very strong history for those of you who want to Google Tupac Amaru, not Tupac Amaru Shakur, although he was named after Tupac Amaru, was an Indigenous revolutionary who fought against the Spaniard colonizers. So there's a lot of power in my name, Ashe. And I'm grateful to have, a name that I can really lean into and hopefully have grown into in all the ways that I can.
I love it. I love it. You're kind of riding your Oshun energy all the way through, right?
Yes.
So one thing, I will say this, we've talked a lot about your work and your business. Let's make it fun, right? I like having fun. So the title of this podcast, as you know, is Singing Your Own Song. So if your journey was a song, doesn't have to be a real song, but it can be. Talk about that song. Would it be uptemp? Would it be, laid back, R&B, smooth jazz? And what would you be doing? Would you be singing it? Would you be producing it? So just tell us about it. I can't wait.
I love this question. So I'm going to cheat a little bit and say that my song will be a mixtape.
Okay. Let's go. Let's get it.
I'm dating myself again. A mixtape probably stolen out the trunk of somebody's car, but that's how you know it's going to be a good mixtape.
Right.
I feel like, I think in advocacy generally, you have to bring the energy. So something that is, up tempo, upbeat, something that, you can march to. But also advocacy is very, very difficult. It can be draining. It can be exhausting and devastating. So I do think that there's definitely room for ballads somewhere on that mixtape. And I think it's both. I really liked how you framed, would it be timeless or would it be trendy?
Yeah.
I think that old school certainly has its values in terms of like, there are beats that when you hear it on that first beat, you already know what it is, right? You
I know.
already know what it is. But also, the new school, like the I think like the newer flavor, it adds to it. So I think some of the songs that would probably be on my next mixtape at some point would be Rise Up, um, which is like a slower ballad, which speaks to, again, like, perseverance and continuing to fight.
Mhm.
I like Fight Song. Um, but one of the songs that I will share that even on my worst days, if I'm just having one of those days, I just, throw it on and the bad day is still happening, but it's just not as bad anymore, is Three Little Birds by Bob Marley.
Bob Marley, I love it.
I could just be down in the dumps. But there's something about that song that I think just speaks to hope in terms
Yeah.
of like, no matter what we're going through at the end of the day, at the end of this day, the proverbial day, the days of our lives, our individual lives, um, it's going to be okay. It's going to be
Yeah.
okay. And so again, not a singular song I can pinpoint to. It's a mixtape with just a few rah songs, but definitely Three Little Birds is going to be at the beginning and the end of that mixtape.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
every little thing's gonna be. I love it. Oh my
Yes.
goodness, I love it.
Mhm.
So, as we round out, one of the things that I like to ask people is, if you were now advising a younger version of you, like the person that just came out of the military, just got out of college, and is looking at getting into political activism, and you had to, from your experience, give them some words of wisdom or some seeds of wisdom that they may not find, just easily available or readily available, what would you say? What would be those little nuggets you would share with them to help them navigate through this journey?
I would share three things.
Okay.
First and foremost, it's embrace your authenticity, especially for people of color and for women. Depending on the space you're in, it can be a little bit more corporate, a little bit more professional. I'm using
Yeah.
air quotes for professional because that, signifies a certain type of being, a certain type of existence. And I think that it's so important that folks trust in who they are and that really understand that their unique lived experiences bring such an important perspective into conversations, and to not change who they are and give into that pressure to present in a certain way, to feel that need to have certain credentials in order to be seen in certain ways. Because I have all the credentials. And even this far into my journey, there are times when I walk into a room and people are like, well, who is she and why is she here?
Yeah.
Um, and so I think that there is such strength in our authenticity. And that when you are true to who you are, it will always, without question, without doubt, with no falter, it will always guide you into the right opportunities and the right people. So always just be your authentic self, regardless of what people pressure you into being. Um, the other thing is, this work is hard. And I think that we need to talk more about how to fight through adversity, persevering through adversity. There are times to fight and, just run through the tape. And sometimes you have to tap out, right? Sometimes you
Yeah.
have to recognize, like, this is my time to rest. This is my break. And so just acknowledging that challenges and setbacks are going to happen. They're not a reflection of failure for you, but just a reflection of the society that we live in that is constantly judging us by what we deliver, what we produce, who we know, all the things, right? So just, again, keep pushing forward when you can, but also no apologies if you tap out and take a break to restore and recalibrate. Which has, I grew up thinking like I have to always deliver, have to deliver, have to over deliver. And I'm at a point in my life's journey where if I'm going to tap out, I'm going to tap out because I know how important it is for me to take that break so that I can come back and jump in and continue to fight and advocate at some point in the future. And last but not least, I learned this so quickly in my earlier days, especially working on Capitol Hill. In DC, people will ask you, who do you work for and what do you do, before they ask you for your name.
Wow.
And I learned that a lot of people are very transactional in building their networks. You know, they build networks based off of the title on a business card. They build networks off of, you know, proximity to power, you know, whatever that, you know, may be, agency power, you know, policy power, what have you. I have learned that if you build a network full of people who have shared values with you, and have are moving towards the same broader North Star, that when it comes to transitions, when it comes to support, you will have people who value and respect you as a person, compared to just using you because of the title that you have at a certain point of time. And so that's my way of saying, build a strong network, but a strong network of support rooted in values and not titles. Because the relationships that you build through shared values is going to be time and again invaluable when you navigate your career and life.
Oh my goodness, I love that. I love the way you wove in not only the networking and kind of being your authentic self, but knowing when to fight, knowing when to tap out, right? That's cool. I mean, as an amateur martial artist for, you know, most of my life, you know, there was a time in my life when I didn't want to tap out, right? I was like, I can get through this. But I think if you really think it through, the reason to tap out is not to, you know, for the most part, to say I'm worse than, or I'm not as good as whatever. It's because you could get hurt, right? If you don't know when to tap out, you can really permanently damage something that you can't come back from. So knowing that and understanding, oh, whoa, let me regroup, recalibrate, and then come back better and stronger and ready to fight again another day. That's maturity, right? That's something that you get through experience. So thank you. That's something that a younger version of yourself might not have been as attuned to, right?
Absolutely. And I'll just share, I love the martial arts metaphor. Learn to listen to your body. You know, the lesson I've learned of, you know, deciding when to push through the pain versus like when just to tap out, is, without getting too philosophical, you know, in America, and we are often judged by our deliverables in the workforce, right? Whatever our job is what are you delivering? Deliver more, deliver more, deliver more. And so oftentimes our value is based off of what we're delivering for an organization. Whereas, you know, if you tap out, you have some space to really breathe and realize that our value is not restricted to the deliverables that we produce. It's the lives that we touch. And unless we take time to tap out, restore, recalibrate, and heal, you won't be able to show up for people in ways that you can and that are needed, unless you take care of your needs first. So I just wanted to add that really important point in the context of choosing to fight on and fight the good fight, which is important, but also knowing when to be like, this is pass the baton to somebody else, and this is your leg to run, because I'm healing right now.
One of the things that you talked about was having good people around you. Talk about someone, and they may not even know about it, right? It may not even be someone that you see every day, but someone who's been a mentor or a model for you that you've been able to get fed from, or been able to learn from, and that's helped you become the wonderful person you are today.
Oh, I love this question. So I'll share three public and then one personal.
Nice.
One, giving shout out to the late Congressman John Lewis, you know, my representative, just the embodiment of someone who really lived their values, even when nobody was looking. So just very, very grateful for the opportunities I had to learn from him under his tutelage.
Yes.
Hillary Clinton, again, aside from me, you know, having the honor to nominate her at the convention, was really just a trailblazer in a lot of ways, who faced a lot of resilience publicly and privately, who I learned a lot about how to navigate political spaces as a woman. And of course, Shirley Chisholm, who is the first sister to, be elected to Congress and run for a major party's presidential nomination. This is legacy and history, right? Of like all three of them laid the groundwork generations ago to bring us into this moment where we are today. So those are three public figures. And I love this question because privately, I am always constantly inspired by the women I get to work with. It is the women who you will never see on television, the women whose names you will never see printed in any newspaper article, but it is the women who do the work every day. The women who show up as organizers, as strategists, as everyday women who are just trying to live their lives and make their communities a little bit better for their families and for their children, for their communities, for the next generation. And you always have the folks who are high profile and you see them on TV, and yes, lessons learned, watching how you're doing this. I like how you did this. I won't do that, but I do like how you did like the other thing. But time and again, all the campaigns I've worked on, the roles that I've, served within in government, nonprofits, campaigns, I'm always just so astonished and humbled and inspired by the incredible human beings that I've had the privilege and honor to work with, who do this every day, do this every single day. And I'm often, reminded about, I've been very, 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 very blessed to have the platforms that I do. And, just so grateful to know that there are women that I have the honor to work with, so many names, so many faces, but that's the real work of movement building, right? It's not going to be someone you see necessarily on TV. They may be the face of a movement. They may be the face of a cause or an issue, but it's the folks on the ground who take an idea that at one point in history is considered revolutionary, and work every day to making it one day so that we're actually having it. We're talking about it. It's a possibility. So I just want to give a shout out and thank you to all the incredible women, especially Black and Brown women that I've worked with, throughout my career, because it's them. They are the ones who inspire me to continue to do the work that I do.
Wow, amazing. You got me inspired now. I want to go out and make some change now. So before we go, I just like to give the opportunity, if there's anything else that you want to share with the audience or anything that you want to put out, in terms of, thoughts, visions, or whatever, the floor is yours, my sister.
Oh, I love that. So I will leave with a question. First of all, Carlton, thank you so much for the opportunity to come and share a little bit more about my story and how I got started and some of my lessons learned. I think because my thing is, grassroots governing power. I would encourage all your listeners out there to ask themselves, what does political power mean to them? Because once you're able to define what political power means to you, then you can define how you can exercise it and how we can build it collectively, because that's the way of making social change. And political power means different things. Some people just want to vote on election day and be one and done. That is absolutely okay, right? For some folks, political power is sharing their personal stories in official government hearings, right? That is also an important way to exercise your political power. For some folks, it's meeting with their legislators. For some folks, it's organizing their neighbors around an issue. Whatever it is, right? Political power, whatever it means to you, it's completely your power to define it. But the obligation, I would argue, as people who live in our current America, is to exercise it and to build it, right? Because that's how we build a government that represents us and we can finally have what our Constitution that was written hundreds of years ago with not us in mind, but collectively, when we engage in political power as we choose to practice it, we can finally have a government of by and for the people.
Thank you for tuning in to this installment of Singing Your Own Song. We hope you enjoyed today's adventure and that it uncovered valuable insights on living a purpose-driven life. Don't forget to subscribe, follow us, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Your feedback fuels our mission to bring you more compelling stories and lessons from individuals who are singing their own song and redefining success on their own terms. We invite you to connect to Carlton Burrows on social media and visit us at singingyourown.song.com to stay updated on upcoming episodes, behind-the-scenes content, and to join our vibrant community of purpose-driven individuals.